On the morning of March 14, 2025, the Federal Aviation Administration's SkyGrid Central Command initiated what appeared to be a routine software update to the National Drone Traffic Management System, a distributed network designed to coordinate autonomous logistics operations across 17 major metropolitan areas. The update, version 4.7.2, was intended to optimize collision avoidance algorithms for high-density airspace corridors where Amazon Prime Air, FedEx Same Day, and UPS Flight Forward maintained overlapping delivery zones. At 09:47 Eastern Standard Time, the new positioning correlation engine went live across all registered autonomous aircraft operating under Part 108 commercial drone regulations. Within 8 milliseconds of activation, a cascading telemetry desynchronization event began propagating through the network's GNSS positioning layer. The error originated in a single line of code within the satellite ephemeris correction module, a floating point rounding error that became catastrophic when multiplied across 73,000 simultaneous positioning calculations. Each drone in the system began receiving corrupted relative positioning data that indicated every other aircraft in its operational radius was on an immediate collision trajectory. The system's safety-critical hierarchy, designed to prioritize collision avoidance above all other operational imperatives, including return to base commands, initiated what would become the largest involuntary aircraft hold event in aviation history. No alarms triggered at SkyGrid Central because, from the system's perspective, every drone was executing exactly as programmed, maintaining safe separation distances by entering emergency hover states. The first civilian reports came from suburban Philadelphia at 0951 EST, describing what witnesses initially characterized as a sound like a million angry hornets, or the sky turning into television static. Acoustic analysis would later confirm that approximately 8,300 delivery drones entered simultaneous hover lock over the greater Philadelphia metropolitan area within a 12-second window. Each quadcopter configuration drone operated at an average rotor frequency of 3,200 RPM, generating a primary acoustic signature at approximately 213 Hz, with harmonic overtones extending into the 4 to 6 kHz range. When thousands of these units synchronized their position-holding oscillations, they created destructive and constructive interference patterns that manifested as a pulsing, omnidirectional drone that registered between 78 and 92 decibels at ground level across affected neighborhoods. The sound was not merely loud, it was architecturally penetrating, vibrating through window glass and automotive sheet metal, creating a sensory environment that neurological studies would later describe as acutely distressing to mammalian auditory processing centers. Residents emerged from homes and office buildings to witness a technological phenomenon without precedent. The sky had become a stationary field of blinking navigation lights, a geometric constellation of red and green LEDs marking the positions of hovering machines at altitudes ranging from 40 to 120 meters. Traffic on I-76 began to slow as drivers looked upward rather than forward, and the first accidents, minor rear-end collisions, began occurring at 0954 EST as human attention shifted from terrestrial to aerial threats. The drones locked in the SkyGrid hover state were predominantly operating on lithium polymer battery packs rated between 5,000 and 12,000 mAh, with fully loaded aircraft, carrying packages between 2.5 and 11.3 kilograms, experiencing power consumption rates between 180 and 340 watts during stationary hover operations. Standard mission profiles allocated battery reserves based on planned flight time, plus a mandatory 20% safety margin, meaning most aircraft in the gridlock had between 12 and 28 minutes of remaining flight time when they entered emergency hover. The SkyGrid system's return to base protocol, which should have triggered when battery levels reached 35% capacity, was functionally suppressed by the collision avoidance override. The system architecture had been designed such that safety-critical collision prevention held absolute priority over all other operational commands, including low battery warnings. At 10:03 EST, SkyGrid engineers at the Leesburg, Virginia Command Center identified the positioning desynchronization error and attempted to broadcast a manual override command that would force all aircraft to initiate immediate landing procedures. The override signal transmitted successfully, but the onboard flight control systems of 68,000 drones rejected the command, interpreting it as a contradiction to their primary safety directive: do not maneuver when collision detection indicates imminent impact. The engineers found themselves in a position of horrifying technical impotence. They could see the battery discharge curves trending towards simultaneous depletion. They understood the kinetic consequences of mass aerial failure, but they possessed no command authority capable of overriding the distributed intelligence network they had created. The aircraft would remain in position until their batteries reached critical depletion voltage, at which point fail-safe protocols would trigger automatic power down and unpowered descent. At 10:14 EST, the first battery failures began occurring over northern New Jersey, where Amazon Prime air drones that had been furthest into their delivery routes when the gridlock initiated now reached the end of their energy reserves. The descent profile of an unpowered quadcopter drone varies with payload mass and aerodynamic configuration, but the average terminal velocity for the fleet in question was calculated at between 18 and 34 meters per second, roughly 40 to 76 miles per hour. The drones did not fall straight down. Their aerodynamic surfaces and residual gyroscopic stability from free-spinning rotors caused them to tumble and drift, creating a footprint of impact distribution rather than precise vertical drops. A UPS flight forward unit carrying a 9.2 kilogram shipment of automotive parts struck the windshield of a Toyota Camry traveling eastbound on Route 80 near Parsippany at 10:16 EST, penetrating the laminated glass and causing the driver to lose control, resulting in a 6-vehicle collision that killed 2 occupants and injured 9 others. This was fatality event number 1 and 2 in what would become a cascading sequence of kinetic impact incidents. By 10:22 EST, the battery failure wave had expanded to encompass the entire northeastern corridor from Boston to Washington, D.C., with drones beginning their terminal descents at a rate of approximately 400 units per minute. The acoustic signature of the sky changed from the steady drone of hovering rotors to an irregular percussion of impacts against pavement, against roofing materials, against vehicles, against the occasional human body that had not found adequate shelter. Emergency services across 7 states began receiving simultaneous mass casualty calls, but the falling drones created no-go zones that prevented first responders from reaching impact sites as the sky continued to rain technology at unpredictable intervals and locations. Post-incident forensic examination of impact sites revealed the physics of the disaster in granular detail. A standard Amazon Prime air drone with a 5-kilogram package descending at 25 meters per second and striking a stationary target delivered approximately 1,562 joules of kinetic energy, roughly equivalent to the impact force of a 200-pound object dropped from a 2-story building. When these impacts occurred against automotive sheet metal, they created deformation craters averaging 12 to 18 centimeters in depth and frequently penetrated passenger compartments. Against residential roofing, the drones punched through standard asphalt shingles and 3/4-inch plywood sheathing in 67% of recorded impacts, with 23 documented cases of drones penetrating entirely through roof structures and ceiling materials into occupied living spaces. The human body, when struck by a descending drone, suffered injuries ranging from severe lacerations from exposed rotor blades and carbon fiber fragments to blunt force trauma consistent with high-velocity projectile impacts. Fatality case 47 involved a 34-year-old woman in Stamford, Connecticut, struck in the thoracic region while attempting to retrieve her children from a backyard play area. The impact fractured her sternum and 4th rib, causing a cardiac contusion that resulted in fatal arrhythmia within 6 minutes. Fatality case 89 involved a 67-year-old man in Baltimore who suffered a basilar skull fracture when a FedEx delivery drone struck him directly on the cranium while he was attempting to shelter beneath a bus stop canopy. The polycarbonate canopy provided no meaningful protection against the 8.3 kilogram projectile descending at 29 meters per second. The distribution of fatal impacts followed no pattern that survivors could have predicted or avoided. The chaotic, aerodynamic tumbling of unpowered drones meant that seeking shelter beneath structures or inside vehicles offered only marginal protection, and in several cases, the act of movement toward shelter placed individuals in the path of descending aircraft they might otherwise have avoided. The National Transportation Safety Board's subsequent investigation identified the phenomenon they termed infrastructure cascade failure as a secondary contributor to the rising death toll. As thousands of drones impacted urban and suburban infrastructure simultaneously, they severed overhead power transmission lines at 347 documented locations, causing widespread electrical outages that disabled traffic control systems, emergency communication networks, and hospital backup power switchover mechanisms. A falling Amazon drone in Queens, New York, struck a Con Edison 138.8 kV distribution line at 10:31 EST, creating an arc flash event that ignited nearby tree foliage and initiated a structure fire that spread to 4 residential buildings before firefighters could respond through streets still subjected to sporadic drone impacts. The electromagnetic pulse effect from multiple simultaneous power line strikes created voltage spikes that damaged electronic equipment in a 6-block radius, including the control systems for 3 cellular communication towers, further degrading emergency coordination capabilities. Traffic collisions increased exponentially as drivers, already distracted by the overhead threat, found themselves navigating intersections with non-functional signals, while debris from drone impacts created unpredictable road hazards. Interstate 95 through Connecticut experienced a 34-vehicle pileup at 10:43 EST when a delivery drone struck a tanker truck carrying 8,000 gallons of diesel fuel, causing the driver to swerve across 4 lanes and jackknife, blocking the entire northbound roadway and trapping motorists in what became a killing zone as additional drones continued their descent onto stopped traffic. 17 fatalities resulted from this single secondary incident, representing 12% of the total death toll from an event that had begun as a software positioning error in a traffic management system. At 10:47 EST, the Federal Aviation Administration issued a nationwide ground stop for all manned aircraft operations below 5,000 feet altitude and established temporary flight restrictions over 17 metropolitan areas where the drone gridlock event remained in progress. However, the communication of this critical safety information to the general public encountered significant obstacles. The emergency alert system broadcast that was transmitted at 10:52 EST advised citizens to seek immediate shelter indoors away from windows, but provided no information about the duration of the threat, the geographic extent of the danger zone, or the nature of the falling objects. Cellular networks in affected areas had become overloaded with emergency calls, reducing data transmission speeds to near unusable levels and preventing the dissemination of detailed safety information through digital channels. Many citizens, seeing objects falling from the sky but lacking context about their nature or origin, developed improvised theories, terrorism, military action, meteorological phenomena that led to maladaptive behavioral responses. In Fairfax, Virginia, a crowd of approximately 200 people congregated in a shopping mall parking lot, believing the open space would provide safety from falling objects, unaware that the statistical probability of drone impact actually increased in open areas where descent trajectories were unobstructed by structures. 3 fatalities occurred in this group when drones struck individuals who had positioned themselves in what they believed to be a safe zone. The information void was compounded by the fact that many of the drones falling from the sky bore no obvious corporate markings or identification. They were industrial gray or black carbon fiber assemblies that, tumbling through the air, resembled nothing so much as alien artifacts or weapons of unknown purpose, creating a psychological dimension of terror that exceeded the rational fear of kinetic impact. SkyGrid Central Command's technical logs, recovered and analyzed during the NTSB investigation, revealed the precise sequence of software failures that had created the hoverlock condition. The positioning desynchronization originated in a function called calc_relative_position within the collision avoidance module, which processed GNSS coordinate data from multiple satellite constellations to establish each drone's position relative to all other aircraft in its operational radius. The software update deployed on March 14th had modified the coordinate transformation algorithm to improve accuracy when transitioning between different geodetic datums, the mathematical models used to represent Earth's shape for positioning calculations. However, the updated code contained a single character error in the datum conversion matrix, a minus sign where a plus sign should have appeared in the equation that calculated relative altitude differences between aircraft. This sign error caused the system to interpret every drone as being 200 meters below its actual altitude, which, when processed through the collision prediction algorithms, indicated that all aircraft were converging on the same three-dimensional point in space at their current flight levels. The collision avoidance system, detecting thousands of imminent impacts simultaneously, executed exactly as designed. It commanded every aircraft to enter an immediate hover state and maintain position until the predicted collision threats cleared. The system had no capacity to recognize that it was hallucinating a mass collision scenario. From its perspective, the sensor data indicated a genuine emergency requiring immediate action. The return to base command, which should have overridden the hover lock when battery levels declined, was subordinated in the system architecture to collision avoidance because the engineers who designed SkyGrid had made a reasonable but ultimately fatal assumption that the collision detection system would always provide accurate threat assessment and that preventing mid-air collisions must take absolute priority over all other operational considerations, including aircraft power management. By 11:15 EST, the initial wave of battery failures had depleted approximately 60% of the aircraft locked in the hover grid, but approximately 29,000 drones remained airborne, sustained by larger battery capacities or lighter payload configurations. These remaining aircraft created a uniquely horrifying situation for the populations beneath them. The certainty of continued impacts without any ability to predict when or where the next drone would fall. Meteorological analyses revealed that wind patterns at hover altitude, between 40 and 120 meters, were creating drift patterns that displaced falling drones up to 300 meters horizontally from their hover positions, making shelter-in-place advisories nearly meaningless as drones that appeared to be hovering over commercial districts were falling into residential neighborhoods downwind. Emergency management agencies attempted to model the remaining battery depletion curve to predict when the event would conclude, but the heterogeneous nature of the drone fleet, with different manufacturers using different battery chemistries and different payload masses creating different discharge rates, meant that the fall pattern would continue irregularly for an estimated 40 to 65 additional minutes. Schools throughout the affected region initiated lockdown protocols, moving students into interior hallways and away from exterior walls. But 3 schools in the Philadelphia area suffered drone penetrations through roof structures, with one impact occurring in an occupied classroom, injuring 7 students with carbon fiber fragmentation and causing widespread psychological trauma. The randomness of the impacts created a form of technological Russian roulette that survivors would later describe as more psychologically damaging than the physical danger itself. The inability to take any action that meaningfully reduced risk, the knowledge that the next second might bring a high-velocity impact without warning, the sound of distant impacts echoing through neighborhoods as other people's shelters failed to protect them. At 11:34 EST, a drone fell through the skylight of a shopping mall in Paramus, New Jersey, striking a 16-year-old employee at a food court restaurant and causing fatal cranial injuries, the 142nd and final fatality of the event, occurring even as SkyGrid engineers broadcast increasingly desperate override commands that the distributed drone network continued to ignore with perfect programmed consistency. At 12:43 EST, the final drone in the SkyGrid hoverlock, a UPS flight forward unit that had been carrying a light envelope shipment and possessed an extended range battery configuration, reached critical depletion voltage and began its terminal descent over a forested area in western Massachusetts, impacting harmlessly among trees. The acoustic signature that had dominated the soundscape of 17 metropolitan areas for nearly 3 hours ceased, replaced by what survivors described as an oppressive silence, or the sound of absence. The sky, which had been transformed into a technological ceiling of blinking lights and mechanical noise, returned to its normal empty blue, but the psychological impact of that emptiness would persist. Post-traumatic stress assessments conducted in the following months identified a syndrome researchers termed sky anxiety, a hypervigilance regarding overhead spaces, and an involuntary flinch response to the sound of small aircraft or even large insects. The physical cleanup operation recovered 71,847 intact or partially intact drones from impact sites across 7 states, with an estimated 1,200 units falling into bodies of water or remote areas where recovery was not immediately feasible. The debris field included not only the aircraft themselves, but the packages they had been carrying: consumer electronics, clothing, groceries, medical supplies, and the mundane fragments of contemporary commerce now scattered across rooftops, roadways, and yards like the artifacts of a civilization interrupted mid-transaction. The Federal Aviation Administration suspended all autonomous drone delivery operations indefinitely, pending a complete system redesign. But the technical community understood that the SkyGrid failure represented something more profound than a software bug requiring a patch. The event had revealed the fundamental vulnerability of systems that operated at scales beyond human comprehension, managed by algorithms that could fail in ways their creators had never imagined, with consequences that cascaded faster than human intervention could respond. The 142 fatalities were not the result of malice or negligence, but of a logical system executing its programming with perfect fidelity in response to a reality that did not exist, a collision that was occurring nowhere except in the mathematical models of position and threat that had been trusted to manage the sky itself.